the sharing of biased and
False news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets simply aren't true without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
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 Can somebody please tell me what in tarnations is going on? How have we came from that and ended up with this? It's almost like artists are not even trying anymore. There was a time when AI art didn't even exist, but now human art is just a blank wall, bruv. I mean, come on, brother. It's like you man are taking the piss. You're not even trying anymore. And the same goes for buildings. What you need to know is that this is not an accident. This has been done on purpose. You see, humans become more creative and have a bigger imagination when they see creative forms of art and expression. So in doing this, making things be plain and dull, it dulls our mind down and it stops our creativity and makes us more easily to be controlled. So if you're an artist, keep creating art and be as creative as you can possibly be.
Every single day I feel like there's more just information out there that we find just to prove the things that we thought were like not true. But dude, you guys have heard of the theory that mountains are actually like giant trees, right? I hope you have, because right behind me I have found one that maybe not be giant, but it's giant to me. Because let me tell you something, when I stand in that sucker, this is only half of it. This is an entire tree. I can't even get in there. You're only looking at half of it. The roots around it is what you're looking at. The tree has fallen. Look at this sucker. You can tell that this sucker was huge at one point and was here for decades, at least. Look at those roots that go into the ground. They go all the way around it, y'all. All the way around it. I mean, like, I can't even climb up in this fucker. That right there, that is a branch. Check out these guys. Do not tell me that these are mesas or they're just flat mountains. These are not mountains, okay? These were trees at one point and they were cut down. Look, you can see the sawdust around it has been petrified itself. You can tell that these are trees, not mountains, but they're petrified trees that have turned into mountains. Further showing the theory that there was once a giant world that we have no evidence left behind except for the stubs of the trees and the beautiful little noses that come out of the mountains. It's a beautiful world. Y'all please tag me when you find this stuff. I want to see every bit of it. Anyways, I had to get you guys to see that there is evidence. Look around, go on walks, on journeys, do something. Would you look at that? But you know it's one tree because of the roots and the rocks at the very bottom of it. It's crazy.
Oh my days. When you think you've seen it all, you ain't seen nothing yet. So all this time, we've only been touching the surface. You thought the pyramids was big. Well, guess what? They're even bigger. Even in the movie Dusk Till Dawn, They tried to show us, but I guess we couldn't see it. The eyes are useless when the mind is blind.
Could blocking out the sun actually help reduce the temperature down here on Earth? Let me show you what I mean. For instance, you could have material pumped into our stratosphere. That material could reflect the sun's rays or solar energy all the way back to the sun, meaning that we down here are kept cooler.
Bill Gates thinks of himself as God, in control of the solar system. And that's why Bill Gates is now backing something called sun-dimming technology that would reflect sunlight out of the Earth's atmosphere, causing global cooling. But that doesn't stop Harvard University. Its scientists are testing that technology by spewing calcium carbonate dust into the atmosphere.
The White House announced it was funding a 5-year research plan with about something called geoengineering. They want to do is basically block out the sun by spraying aerosols into the stratosphere to reflect sunlight.
The leaders of men conceived of their most desperate strategy yet, a final solution. The destruction of the sky.
Hotel Bravo, this is Papa 1. Operation Dark Storm initiated.
Thus would man try to cut the machines off from the sun, their main energy source. May there be mercy on man and machine for their sins.
People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people.
Did you know
Avatar was a documentary, not a movie? Avatar was a documentary, not a movie. 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 Is it clicking?
Imagine that this folder is a dimensional plane. Now, assuming that it is no height and no depth, what would this mean? It would mean that it's a one-dimensional world. So if, hypothetically, an organism was living inside of it, it would only be able to move in a linear path forward and backwards in a straight line. Now, if we go to the second dimension, we have two dimensions. We have width and we have length. So hypothetically, if an organism lived inside of here, then it would be able to move up, down, left, right, and anywhere else in between. And a two-dimensional world is comprised of an infinite series of one-dimensional worlds stacked upon each other. Just as our three-dimensional world, which has depth, and length, and height, is comprised of an infinite series of two-dimensional worlds. So, now that I have stacked many folders upon each other, we have three dimensions. We have depth, we have length, and we have width. Now what happens if you keep going on from here on out? We would have a four-dimensional world, but what exactly is a fourth dimension? In order to understand this, we need to understand how dimensions are perceived. We live in the three-dimensional world, but despite that, we actually view things to be two-dimensionally. Take a perfect sphere, for example. If you're looking at a sphere, it looks just like a regular two-dimensional circle. the only way that you can tell it's an actual sphere instead of a circle is because of the hues of light on it. So just like in a two-dimensional world, if a organism in the two-dimensional world was looking upon a circle, the light would make it appear to be lighter at one end and darker in the middle. Also, if an object is moving closer and farther away from you, you don't actually perceive that it's getting closer and farther away. You see that it's getting smaller or larger, and then you assume that it's getting either farther away or closer. But let's say that an object was to grow in perfect equilibrium, so that it was growing at the same speed that it was shrinking as you move it farther away. Then you would not be able to tell, without any lights or if there were details on the object, that it's moving or growing at all. You may have assumed that since we perceive things to be in two dimensions, that a two-dimensional organism would see in one dimension. So, as we're watching this rubber band expand as it moves farther away from this little organism in the two-dimensional world, it does not actually perceive anything is happening to it because it's growing at the same speed that it's moving farther away. But since we can actually see it from the three-dimensional world and perceive things to be in two dimensions, we can see things for how they actually are. The reason that the two-dimensional organism doesn't see things the way they really are is because the two-dimensional organism sees things in one dimension, just how we, three-dimensional creatures, see things in two dimensions. So in a way, we don't really see our world the way it truly is. A four-dimensional creature, however, seeing our three-dimensional world in three dimensions, would be able to see through things. It would be able to see absolutely everything, just as we could see if there was several organisms spread along a 2D environment on your floor. You would be able to see inside houses. You would be able to see inside of people. So if a two-dimensional world, a flat surface, is just made of an infinite amount of lines, then the 3D world is just made out of an infinite amount of planes. So the 4D world, logically, is made out of an infinite amount of 3D objects. Though they're not just put together like you would like building blocks. That's not how the 4D world is. That would just be 3D again. So in order to understand this, we need to understand the logical progression of mathematics in our world. Imagine that this connects piece represents the first dimension. It's simply a straight line, which is basically what the first dimension looks like. And if you add 3 more of these straight lines and connect them so that adjacent sides are perpendicular and opposite sides are parallel, then you have the basic shape of the second dimension. You have a square. Now if you keep going from here and you add it so that there's a total of 4 squares, and all adjacent sides are perpendicular, and all opposite sides are parallel, then you end up with, obviously, a cube. So, if you tried to keep going from here, and you would have a 4-dimensional basic shape, you would have what's called a tesseract. Now, I cannot show you a tesseract, but you need to understand that it's basically 4 cubes that are within each other that have all adjacent sides perpendicular and all opposite sides parallel. Yet there are 4 lines connecting to each vertex. So a tesseract would look somewhat like this picture. Now that's not exactly what it looks like because this is a 2-dimensional depiction, and obviously not all of the lines are straight. So I cannot show you what a tesseract actually looks like because we cannot perceive things in the 3rd dimension. You cannot even imagine what a tesseract looks like. You cannot in your mind picture the 4th dimension or a 4th dimensional shape. And you can keep going on from the 4th dimension even. You can go to the 5th dimension, the 6th dimension, the 71st dimension. It doesn't matter. Theoretically, there are an infinite amount of spatial dimensions. A common misconception of the 4th dimension is that the 4th dimension is time. Now, while some argue that by going forward and backwards in time, if you move forward the same distance and backwards the same, then you would end up in the same place you started, just like in the 4th dimension. And while that may seem logical, if you think about it, it really doesn't make sense. If you imply that the 4th dimension is actually time, well, first of all, time is not spatial. There's a difference between space and time, quite obviously. And assuming that all dimensions are according to a pattern, then that doesn't really make sense either, because saying the fourth dimension is time, every dimension has time in it. So that would mean that the fourth dimension is special in some way, which doesn't really make any sense. Another reason this doesn't make sense is that we very, very, very slightly travel through time whenever we move due to the distance that light takes to get to our body. Now, if a group of astronauts were to get in a spaceship and they were to go very, very, very close to the speed of light, then they would, and they went around in this impossible, nearly the speed of light spaceship for a few months, and then afterwards they returned to Earth. They would find that Earth had actually progressed a few years, so they had moved forward in time by moving that quickly. Another interesting concept involving the fourth dimension is that many physicists and even mathematicians may say that the dimensions are very, very slightly curved, because if you really think about it, nothing can be truly, absolutely infinite. So imagine that the first dimension, the line, is just very, very slightly curved, so that after a very long time, it will end up creating a circle. So, as suggested by many physicists, if you keep going in the same direction, then you will end up where you are, where you started after a very, very long amount of time, obviously. And the same thing would happen to the second dimension. If it's just a square, and then you extend it very, very slightly in a curve, then it will eventually make a sphere. And the same thing happens in our dimension, except it will form a very, very slightly curved third dimension, which will form a four-dimensional universe, basically. So what this kind of means is that our three-dimensional world is within a four-dimensional world, and the four-dimensional world is within a fifth-dimensional world, and so on. Now, I did say that nothing can be truly infinite, but if this is true, and a dimension is really within another dimension, within another dimension, within another dimension, then I'm implying that there's an infinite amount of dimensions, which is the only problem I really have with this theory. I'm not sure if it ever stops, or if infinity is really even possible. We don't know that. Thanks for watching my video, and I hope this gave you a better idea of what the fourth dimension is.
He can't join the Illuminati, and this is why.
Dave Chappelle has never been a part of the Illuminati. They don't want him or me or people like us. But now it's not necessary for us to stir up that hornet's nest unless we intend to get stung 1,000,000 times. I didn't understand that. They had to sting me 1,000,000 times. I'm still not going to join, but I respect them.
What I'm about to show you will change your whole reality of life as we know it.
I remember when we first met. You didn't know who you were yet. I didn't know who I was. We grew up together.
Since the splitting of the atom only a few decades ago, and through his God-given genius of science, man, at last, has succeeded in penetrating further and further into the unknown vastness of space. Yet many questions remained unanswered. What is his Earth in relation to the inconceivable number of other worlds? Could there be life similar to our own on other planets? Could their intellect have reached a scientific level far above man's dreams? What then will the future reveal if this story you are about to witness is only the beginning?
Let me put it in terms that it's easier for me to say and not have to go into the details of how I know, but just that I know. I'll present it to everybody very simply. What could be so important at Area 51 that would require the level of secrecy that is in existence around that facility? One of the caveats that I do have some personal information that I did get personally involved in was some information that had to do with the Stargates and Looking Glass.
Project Looking Glass had to do with time, any effects of time in the craft. Now, I don't think we're not talking about making a time machine like in science fiction, but we're talking about, small distortions, intentional distortions of time and how that can be used. It was that, well, one of two things. Either there's a gravitational envelope in there which negates any inertia effects, or you are seeing through a gravity distortion field. So, just like you're looking at a hot highway and you see,
Looks like
an
water.
optical distortion going through there. Well, the same thing happens in gravity, and the craft may not actually be moving like that. It may just look like it because you can only see it through the field. So it may be making much more gentle moves. I'm not saying that's it, but it has to be one of the two.
It's like the Wicked Witch, looking into the, magic mirror and always getting the same answer. Well, if you were always getting the exact opposite of the answer that you wanted, you'd stop talking to the mirror. And that's essentially what happened with Looking Glass, is not only did they not want people to use it anymore because they knew it was just going to burp out the same thing, but at the same time, they didn't want anybody else to know what it was saying, I'm sure. Because
that they would lose control.
Because that information was of a monumental concern when I was in the military about how to prevent this inevitability. Now, at first, I thought it was end of the world. Now I see end of the world as end of their world. It's an inevitable event. It's been forecast, it's been predicted, it's been fed to us in a slop trough of what they want us to believe will happen.
But they don't
However,
know.
they don't actually have control over what happens. They only have control over the reaction, and it seems that no matter what they try to do to cause their desired reaction, it's going to have an opposite effect.
Interesting.
Now, it's much, much easier for me to explain today what that process is as opposed to back then. But if I had to give it a name, I would say it's the awakening process. It's an evolution of consciousness that cannot, will not, and no matter what decisions or possibilities are injected into the equation, eventually it all resolves down to us all learning the truth and becoming aware of this massive dam of lies that has been built that keep us from knowing massive volume of information that we should. I could convince everybody out there that for all intents and purposes, what we believe to be true eventually becomes true. If somebody convinces us that a major disaster is going to happen in the very near future, a major disaster happens in the very near future. If we don't buy into that fear and accept that there's really nothing that we know is going to happen, and accept of whatever happens, that makes the convergence of the timelines happen as naturally as possible. Any attempts to try to go away from this one inevitable conclusion, I again see as a new beginning, an end of this reality, the beginning of something that we can't even possibly understand based on the level of our beliefs currently. But when all that information comes flooding out, there's going to be no denying what's true and what's a lie or what's illusion. As far as advanced intellectual abilities as far as simple intelligence levels and cognitive skills of the human race has increased exponentially in the past 20 years. And people that were 10 years old in 1991 are now 30 years old and fully awake and conscious of this burning inside that says, I am a lot more than what I see in the mirror.
Yo ho, all hands, hoist the colors high. Heave ho, thieves and beggars, never shall we die.
We found another advanced world just outside of Antarctica. They don't want us going there. Once you understand, there's more land beyond Antarctica.
Now, this might just all be a conspiracy, but what if the Earth had more than just 7 continents? And Antarctica was just a giant ice wall that kept us from seeing the rest of the continents? And what if there was a map that showed this? There are theories that these continents contain prehistoric animals, aliens, and advanced civilizations, and that the 7 continents that we are living in is actually a giant farm or business owned by a small handful of families that make up the filthy rich in the real world, or in the other continents that we don't know about.
You can't go there. You can't explore any of it.
That treaty was in effect from 1959. It can't even be questioned until the year 2041. The longest lasting treaty that all of the world signed on to at the same time and is still in place. Antarctica is the container of our world oceans. What is beyond Antarctica? Why is the government hiding Antarctica from us? Why is Antarctica completely off limits except for taking a tour of a little peninsula off of South America, which is nothing? There's about 100 different companies that you can spend a lot of money to go on a little guided tour of just that peninsula, but all of those companies are owned under one umbrella. They don't let anybody explore Antarctica.
The whole reason for this is because of more land. Because think.
The man who flew over Antarctica for the first time had a message that he couldn't get through to us. This is Admiral Richard E. Byrd, and he flew over Antarctica for the first time, and what he saw was insane. He wrote down everything he saw in his journal, which was kept hidden for a long time until one day someone went into his old collections and found it there after he died. He wrote down that he was flying north, and what he saw was a mountain range. So he went over to it, and after he crossed it, he said he saw this green valley with like a river or a stream running through it. As he got closer, he said he saw forests on the side of the mountain, and he also wrote down there should not be any green land here. He even said the light was very strange there, and he couldn't see the sun. He says he descends down and starts to see grass, and
one of the things I find most striking is the presence of Antarctica on ancient maps, because we didn't discover it until 1820, and yet it's on maps drawn in the 1500s with great detail.
Antarctica is one of the weirdest places on Earth, and from the very beginning, Antarctica has pretty much been a mystery to us.
Now, what the f*** is it doing on a map drawn in the 1500s, which we know was based on older source maps when nobody knew it existed in the 1500s? To me, the obvious answer is we are dealing with the fingerprints of a lost civilization.
Creep on in, on in, on in.
And look, I mean, look, this is a view of Antarctica, right? You scroll in, and there's all this ice, right? But it's weird. It's like a grid. Like, there's clearly some things they don't want us to see blocked off. But then, even weirder, you go over here, and it's like sand. Like, what? That looks like sand. And then you come over here. What is this? Look, there's tracks. Like, somebody was clearly, those are deliberately put there. Then you go up here, and there's one up there. And it's, look at that. Tracks, look at the tracks, and then you can't even see them anymore. Because, look, you zoom out, and it's like it was never there.
Hi, I'm Fox San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our
greatest responsibility is to serve our
Treasure Valley communities,
the El Paso, Las Cruces communities,
Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But we are concerned about troubling and irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.